and software systems that really protect against this, but we have to think, okay, am I going to be more exposed to cyber attacks in one location versus another? And no doubt about it, you will, right? And that depends on the fiber infrastructure, it depends on, of course, the man-made risks that are in that area. And fiber breaks, right? We deal with this across the oceans more than anywhere else, but of course we can deal with it on our sites. Can a backhoe take it out, is a great example, or the overhead aerial fiber lines that could, get taken out by a windstorm. So little things to think about. The earthquake one I bring up, because the earthquake one's always fun and interesting to me, because people always say, well, I'm going to put my data center in Nebraska because there's no earthquake risk. Well, guess what? There is no seismically inactive region in the entire U.S., period. All right? We sit on a ball of molten lava with a crust that's, 1/1,000,000th the size of this ball. I mean, you bet we move around. You bet things change no matter where we are in this ball, right, in this sphere. But the greatest earthquake risk in the country, we always think, is right here, right along the California coast. No doubt about it. It's got a lot of earthquake risk, a lot of propensity of earthquakes and so forth, but we also build for it. We plan for it there. The biggest earthquake fault in the entire U.S. is right there, the New Madras Fault. Look it up. Boy, it's fun, right? Department of Homeland Security says this right here is about the greatest natural disaster risk for the entire U.S., right? And it's right where we don't expect it or don't plan for it, which is why it makes us so vulnerable, right? Because we're not building for it, we're not planning for it, we don't expect it. And it's the unexpected things that happen, right? I mean, Texas got tornadoes last year, Kansas got hurricanes. Places we don't normally plan for these things, right, can get them. So anyways, that's kind of the big risk right there. And it's a big risk because, St. Louis and Kansas City and everywhere else that's in that area basically doesn't plan and build for it, but also they pretty much sit about a foot or 2 or 3 above the rivers. And so when, all the different flood control and dams and rivers shift, everything gets flooded as well. It isn't just that buildings get taken out, everything gets flooded. So it's very similar to what happened in Japan last year. So just, another thing to think about. And then I talk about these secondary things, right? I put volcanoes up there pretty high. We actually planned for this at Yahoo in Washington State. There's 28 active volcanoes in Washington and Oregon. 28 active volcanoes. Definition of an active volcano is that it will likely blow in the next 20 years. That's a pretty, you think about it, in the life of a data center, that's pretty close. So we got to think about this volcano risk, right? And it doesn't mean it will. I mean, but if we look back to, Mount St. Helens, when it went, what was that, 1989, I think? I can't remember for sure, but not that long ago as far as time goes. And when it blew, it took out a massive area. I mean, trees were knocked down, what was it, as far as 100 miles away. I mean, this is huge stuff, right? We had 10 feet of ash that fell in the Washington area where we put our data center, 10 feet of ash. 10 feet of ash is not that big of a deal. Shuts your cooling systems down, totally fouls them up. You are definitely shut down for a little while until you get your cooling systems clean and the ash falls out of the air. But if it rains when you got 10 feet of ash on your roof, your building will collapse. It's essentially hards to concrete and becomes the same weight of concrete, right? So now so you get 10 feet of concrete on your roof, boom, building just collapses, right? Catastrophic failure. So you have to kind of plan for these things, and we did up there, but not a lot of people do think about these things, and eventually it will go. Lightning actually takes out more data centers in the U.S. as far as natural disasters go than any other natural disaster as far as the information that I pulled together. So, and not that these are long-term outages or short-term, right, but things to think about. Obviously, fires can impact them both internal and external. I mentioned cyber attacks already and fiber breaks, but there's also workforce issues, right? Is it going to be a union issue? Is it going to be you're going to get workforce availability there, whether it's to construct or to operate, right? Can they get there? Is a bridge going to go out? And that's what I mean really by kind of like site access. Will bridges go out on the way there? It's great if you have 3 different fuel suppliers, but if all the bridges, collapse on the way to your data center, then it really doesn't do any good. You're not going to get refueled. And so these are things to kind of think about, right? And do you have multiple different ways to get fueled into that area? So here's kind of another thing, right, is how long do you have to really think about these events, right? Do you worry about the big event that's not likely to occur, like a volcano? Well, here's one, right? And these are nuclear power plants in the U.S. Do we worry about nuclear power plants? Probably not. And should we? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there as an idea. The bottom line is, in 35 years, we've had 3 significant nuclear power plant, either disasters or risk, right? It is around the world, right? Obviously, one in Japan, one in Russia, one in the U.S. And the first one being really 3 Mile Island, which didn't turn out to be so bad. But nonetheless, it shut down that area for a while to come. But Chernobyl From the time that the first fire broke to the time that everything was extinguished was less than 5 hours. That's it, a 5-hour window, right? It took 2 minutes for the first emergency response teams to get to the fire. 2 minutes, that's it. This was, I mean, talk about amazing infrastructure, amazing emergency response, right? I mean, what if they weren't there in 2 minutes? The second team was there in 15 minutes. A third team was there by 15 minutes. The second team was there somewhere between the two, right? That's amazing. If you think about that kind of response rate, right? But it also today, right, still there's 40,000 square miles of area that is contaminated and off limits. 40,000 square miles. That's tremendous, right? That's the size of small countries. So being close to these could be a risk. Right? I'm not saying be scared. I'm not saying don't worry if you are. I'm just saying things to think about, right, that we normally don't think about. We think about the kind of short-term stuff, not always the long-term stuff. We think about the natural disasters, not the man-made disasters. 94% of all data center outages occur by people. Things fail, equipment breaks, right? The bottom line is people, how we react to things that end up making things fail, right? That end up making a data center fail. Right, so we can't really take people out of the equation. We never really will be. Why did Chernobyl go down? It was a human-caused, error, right? That's kind of the key point here is that we can't always deal with all these things. We have to think about them. There's a picture of Phoenix, Arizona from a year ago. I think it was May last year. And pretty exciting. I mean, can you imagine if you're down here in these lights and seeing this huge wall of dust? Now, granted, this didn't cause any data center outages, right? Not at all. But I mean, it's definitely going to impact your cooling systems for at least a little while, right? And it's something to think about in the future. Okay, what are you going to have going forward? So just, again, kind of things, thrown out there, sort of things to know. It's the unknown risk. What am I not thinking of? And that's where it kind of really leads to some of the intangibles here, right? I talked a little about this workforce thing. I certainly worry about this one in sites that are really small. I dealt this in Quincy, Washington, town of 5,600 people, right? Town of 5,600 people, it's hard to get 1,000 people to come and work on your data center. You got to import people. It just so happened that Microsoft was building their data center at the exact same time. So we were competing heavily. So the labor rates went up by 20% from the time we started the project to the time we ended the project. Right? It's a year to build a data center, right? And the reason why is because of this, because of labor shortages, right? You're competing for labor. What did I do to keep people working for me? I gave them jackets and barbecue lunches every Friday, nice warm jackets, the big Yahoo logo, and they stayed working with me, right? Instead of going to work for the other one. The other guys had to pay a lot more money to keep those people there. You have to do, things like that in these small towns. So things to think about. Not saying you're all going to small towns, but anywhere you go, you have to think about these things, right? We dealt this in France and Germany with union disruptions for data centers, building them, right, and operating them. So we have man-made things to deal with it. Obviously, climate, equals total power. Power mixes are forward risk, right? We talked about that. Power reliability is really a cost changer. Like what Facebook's doing in Sweden. It's a cost changer. Save a lot of money on buying generators if you put it on a very reliable grid. And there's plenty of grids in the U.S. that are this reliable. It's not just Sweden that has them. There's obviously speed and schedule, and this is really a key one. We always, schedule slips, right? Budgets increase because schedule slips. The bottom line is speed. Right, speed is key. You really want to get that data center running quickly in most cases. And what kind of weather or storms you're going to deal with, not only during construction, but during operations that'll impact the operations or ability to get to that data center and continue working on it. This happens in every data center I've ever worked on around the globe. We always have some weather-related event that temporarily disrupts the construction of a data center. Right? And every data center build, we put in a nap room. Right? And it's a nap room most of the time. It's a sleeping room for when the time comes when people have to stay in the data center because they can't get home because there's an ice storm or something else, right? So, you got to kind of think about these things. This is where time really comes in key because time is obviously money. You go from 10 months to 12 months to build a data center, that's a huge slip in cost, right? You just, added basically about 25% more cost to your time-related items in your budget. Trailers, project managers, other overhead, things like that. Temporary power cost, et cetera. So, how long will it take? And this one always impacts people. The utility always says it's going to take 6 months, and it ends up being 8 months. or something like that, right? So the cost or time to get that power is absolutely key. How about receiving all the tax incentives, right? And this is a key one I talked about before. There's plenty of people that's been hit by, I've been hit by it myself. And so you want to make sure you're getting those tax incentives, right, done before before you really start building, or have some certainty of that, right, an absolute certainty. Permits is another one, right? Some locations, I built one data center, it literally is an over-the-counter permit. It took 1 hour to get the permit. All right, that's rare. But in most cases, we're dealing months to get permits. Sometimes it's weeks, but in most cases, it's months. So that's key. Are you going to take 3 months to get a permit when you really only have 10 months to build your data center? So, and also water, fiber, sewer. It's not just power. It's all these other things. Right? Are you going to get those things on time as well? I was just dealing with AT&T last week on a project. They told me it's going to be 6 to 9 months to get fiber to the project. We have to have it up and running by April. Right? We're starting construction this month. Right? It's a very short project. But I'm like, well, that won't work. You guys just lost the deal, right? We're going to pull up the next fiber guy. We got 5 fiber providers, right? Okay, fine. You got 3 months to do it, period, right? If you want to say 6 months, that's okay. Take your 6 months. We're not going to buy fiber from you, right? Maybe in the future, but you lose out, right? These things have obviously, but the customer really wanted, the client really would like to have AT&T, but they're fortunately happy with other fiber providers as well. So, but these things, obviously impacts that happen. We thought the fiber, we can build out the conduit, right, and pull the fiber in as little as 3 weeks. That's it, right? I mean, it doesn't take us time to do that stuff. All they can do is make the determinations on each end. But they're telling us it's going to take them 6 to 9 months to do that, right? Sometimes these things take a longer time than they really should. I mentioned construction crews and also acquiring and retaining employees. The Delta said a Google data center is kind of remote. It was tough to get people to come and work there, right? And this is usually not so hard for a big company, but if you're in a small, where you can offer a lot of stock incentives or some other great, money, but if you're a small organization that might not have a lot of maybe incentives you can throw at it, this obviously can matter. So do you have a lot of qualified IT workforce in that area? So it's easy to pull good qualified people in to run and operate your data center. And then of course there's the what else, right? So you have to kind of think through all these different things. So let's see, basically, I mean, in summary, right, it's a really careful analysis, trying to do a lot of due diligence, not just looking at those key high-level items, but really doing thorough research. I mean, days and days of pouring through the internet, about all the research on everything, that utility, that government, right, so you understand the tax incentives, you understand the forward price cost, right, what rate tariffs have been like, what PUC filings have been like, all the disaster risks have been area. It's funny, people say Texas is the most secure place for earthquakes in the U.S., and it really is. If you look at the earthquake map that I put a while ago, there's very few faults that go through Texas, right? There's been many significant, events in the last, call it like 60 years, earthquake events, that have made buildings collapse, right? And that's rare, but it happens in areas. So when you do that research, you go, oh, I just assume there's no earthquakes in Texas. That's wrong. Don't assume. Do the research, right? And you'll find out otherwise. And then you go, oh, maybe I really should design this. It's fine to put data center in Texas, right? If that's what you decide to do, it's fine. But just now you know what, there is an earthquake risk in Texas. It is minor, but it's there, right? And so do I need to prepare for that? And that's all, then then you can at least make a good, qualified decision. So I'm going to talk about this is a site that I'm working on. Some of you know I do a lot of site selections for people under my Megawatt Consulting hat, and I've been doing that for years, and I've done it as an employee for Google and Yahoo. And I also sit as a Chief Technology Officer for a company called Unique Infrastructure Group, which is a developer of data centers. And I've started a colo company in the past. I'm starting another one right now. We have one that's starting up here at this site. And we also have a few anchor tenants coming here, a couple that are very significant names. One you'll probably hear about probably by the end of this month. It'll probably become public. But it's an interesting site, and I want to kind of point this out because it's a good example to point out kind of some of the things I was just talking about. Location, right? And this is accessibility. 55-minute flight from the Bay Area, right on Highway 80, which connects Silicon Valley to Wall Street. And of course, all the fiber lines that run across the country, or many of the fiber lines that run across the country now to Asia and Europe. 15 minutes from the airport, right? Really easy accessibility, right? In a town of 500,000 people with 70 major call centers and data centers in that town, right? So a lot of qualified IT support and everything else. The nice thing about it, it's completely in this safety zone. This is a map put up by the Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security put this map up, and they put all these nuclear power plants I showed earlier, right? They then overlay it with all these other risks they consider. Ice storms, tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, power outages, tsunamis, right? We don't even think about tsunamis here in the U.S., right? Believe it or not, this is all a tsunami risk, especially in here, right? But all the way throughout the whole western coast. And you see there's even tsunami risk, right, throughout the Gulf and the eastern coast, right? No doubt it's everywhere. This is probably less of one, but nonetheless there is one. But you overlay this, and it's hard to tell because all these colors are overlaid. But the only area that's safe is this area right here, right, that they consider to be safe. Everywhere else they say will have some form of a natural disaster or human-caused disaster so big as such as a nuclear power plant that can have a significant impact. So interesting stuff, right? And what's interesting about Reno is it's actually further west than San Diego, right? We think we're so far western San Diego, but of course because of the bend of the country, right? This is San Diego, right? If you take that, straight, longitudinal line, longitudinal line up, right? You see we're actually further to east than Reno is. So Reno is the furthest west major metropolitan area that is in this safety zone. So it's kind of an interesting little part. A lot of infrastructure. I talked about infrastructure, tremendous amounts of infrastructure. There's over 6 major transmission lines. Everyone's got generation each end. There's over a gigawatt of generation all right here, right? It's all natural gas and solar. There's 200 megawatts of wind here. There's about another 250 megawatts of geothermal up to the north. So it's got a lot of different power sources, right? A lot of low-cost, renewable, clean, and reliable power sources. It's also got a lot of water, which is hard to do in the western U.S. And so 100% water economized cooling all year long. And it's got great fiber. Like I said, all the fiber runs across the U.S. The major fiber line is this right here, Highway 80, between Silicon Valley and Wall Street, right, going right through Reno. So good fiber. It's actually faster fiber to Asia, which is surprising, than it is from San Francisco. And it's because you get out of all this congestion that you have in the Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. So, we go into, I know a lot of people probably think about like the TIA, Telecom Industries Association, their 942 standards and other things, right? There's a lot of different standards out there for the industry. This is one of them. Certainly this site meets them all. It's even got a 12-month construction season. Very, very low construction costs. Costs are generally about 20, 30% below market. So it's got a lot of interesting things. A lot of power capacity. By the end of this year, it'll have over a gigawatt of power capacity. Right now, it's 250 megawatts of power capacity. And it's a fully deregulated marketplace. 4 cents a kilowatt hour locked in for up to 20 years. Right? Imagine that, knowing your electricity price for certain for the next 20 years. Again, you pay a price premium for that. You can get cheaper electricity if you lock in a shorter term price, but it's all locked in for the long term. There's over a gigawatt of power being bought this way in Nevada right now. Right, over a gigawatt. That's tremendous for a small state. Right, state's only about 8 gigawatts in total capacity. So it's a very power-rich state. It's got over 50% more supply than there is demand for power. Of course, taxes is really key. Right, that's always the big one. These are all zero. Nevada's unique for that in a lot of these, right? Very, very low. Income tax, again, it's one of the 3 states in the U.S. that has no income tax, but it's got a lot of very special tax incentives at this site. So that's one that, I've been working on. I think it's a lot of fun and interesting, and it has been a lot of work. It's been 3 years to develop all these tax incentives, to develop the power infrastructure, to develop the water infrastructure and water rights, right? And get all the permits and everything else established, right? It's a 30-day permit process. Everything's already been for building a building. So all that stuff took 3 years. So that's kind of my point about site selections, is that when you do this stuff, trying to get all these tax incentives and all these utility negotiations and all this other stuff all developed and formulated beforehand, sometimes can take a lot of time. And a lot of effort. It's not easy to do this stuff. And there's a lot of things to think about, right? So I'm just throwing out kind of like what I think are really the major things and really the Maslow's hierarchy of data center site selections. Major things to think about, some of the gotchas that we often miss. So there they are, and I threw them out there, and I gave you an idea of, or a sample of one of the projects I'm working on. But I want to, finish there and see if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
We do have some time for questions. Is there any in the audience? Just to kind of underscore one point you made
Yeah.
in terms of security that specific virus,
Right.
as well as the subspecific virus that is affected in October.
Yeah.
That was striking to me is probably the biggest security threat that we have now isn't an individual servers or, DDoS attacks. It's control systems.
That's right.
Those control systems control utilities. They control transportation infrastructure. And the viruses are out there. They're gathering information, like some stuff. It's gathering information, doing damage.
That's right.
But, the example that you gave, that Stuxnet was using against us, the power outage, bringing down drones. There was just a recent example where someone brought down a drone they couldn't figure out what it was. Fire.
That's right.
It's absolutely right that there are no utilities in the United States that are NERC SIP compliant. That's a disaster. That's a real nightmare.
That's right. Exactly. It really is. And thanks for making that point, Michael. It's, it is a key point. It's a point I bring up, and it's one of those man-made things that we can't control, right? And just like Michael said, Stuxnet sits and learns. It sits in SCADA systems and just learns, right? And how it took down the Iranian nuclear processing facility is it just learned basically how the system works, how things normally look, right? And it projects that image on the, eventually, it may take months or even years before it actually attacks, right? Because it takes a while to learn all those things. But it projects on the image to the operators that everything's perfectly fine. All the fans and the pumps and everything are doing exactly as they should, right? But meanwhile, it's overspeeding things. This is what it did in the Iranian nuclear processing facility, right? It oversped the centrifuges until they blew up, right? It learned what it would take to blow them up, right? What speed. And it presented what was a normal picture to the operators. So they had no idea something was happening. And this is, of course, how it can get into, and a SCADA system is what all utilities use to monitor and manage their utility networks. So it was kind of, I'm stretching a little bit on sensitive information I'm not allowed to talk about, but I'll leave it at that the people that wrote it understand those systems very well. And we all use variations of that, so it could certainly get into our own building management systems or automation systems, or like I said, paralleling switchgear is an easy one for that to get into, of generative switchgear. And not to say our manufacturers aren't on it, they all are. They're all trying to do their best to protect against this stuff, right? But it means that we have to be really that much more diligent as the buyers of that stuff to ensure that that equipment is as security safe as it can be, right, from these kind of vulnerabilities. And second of all, it's also asking these utilities, because it's electric utilities, yeah, those could be shut down. That's already been proven just here in the U.S. alone, right? What about water? What if you just lost water? If you're water cooling and you lost your water because all of a sudden all the pumps shut down in a water system, that could be dramatic, right? And Michael said, traffic systems like traffic lights and so forth, right? Same thing. All of a sudden, if all the lights turn green at the same time, it's going to be hard to get anywhere. It'll be like my trip in India a week ago. Trying to drive the streets of Mumbai, you really don't get very far, because everyone's going at the same time, which means no one goes anywhere. And so, those are things we have to just think about, and those are things that are good things to ask our utilities. It's not just ask them, do you have power capacity and what's your price, right? And what's your, now, of course, your mix, portfolio mix, and what do you think your price is going to be in the future? But also, are you safe? Are you protecting against these things? Is the substation that's feeding me, is it actually going to stay up during one of these events? Because it can go down instantly and not only be down, but for a while. I mean, if they can blow up massive, motors and things, we could certainly probably also do things like blow up transformers. A 50 MVA transformer doesn't, you don't get one of those right off, the shelves of Walmart. So when you blow up a few of those at the same time, it may take a long time, right, to actually get those systems back up and running again. So all these things are really kind of critical to think about as part of that. So yeah, thanks for asking that question, Michael. It's a great one. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Washington design protect against 10 of
right.
Pretty important. How did you design against that?
Gotcha. And first let me answer the question, why did we design to 10 feet of ash? Because on Mount St. Helens Blue, that's how much ash fell in that area, okay? And so we just figured, okay, when the next volcano blows, we'll just make the assumption it's going to be about the same, right? How do you design for that? It's you look at the weight load of ash, which is not that easy of a thing to find, but you basically look at the weight load of that ash, right, on a per foot, right? And then you just, extrapolate the pounds and build the roof to support that kind of weight loading. And really, like I said, the ash wasn't all all that heavy. So building a roof to support that weight loading was not a stretch at all. It's kind of like a nominal snow load, as far as weight goes. So it wasn't hard to build for it. What's that? It's just slightly, and it was really very slightly, because that area does get a little bit of snow, and so we already designed for that snow load, and it was really not much of a difference between the two. But like I said, if it rains when that ash is there, and that's of course just an if, you don't know what the weather's going to be, but if it rains when ash is there, instantly, right, you're overloaded in weight. You can't really build for that, not practically in any way. We actually, in that building, we keep two snow blowers on that roof, because we found that was one of the most effective ways to remove the ash when Mount St. Helens blew in that area, is they use snow blowers. And so we just keep two big snow blowers on that roof, and they're always up there, ready to go. And that way, if that ash falls, because 10 feet of ash, you get that high, I mean, all your, that's an mostly air economized site. I mean, all your inlets for your air economization are on the roof. They're all going to get completely blocked, right? So you got to be able to clear that. And so, that's what we planned for, is, okay, we'll at least try to be able to clear it off the roof during one of those events. You never know what's going to happen, but I mean, these are, just things that we think about. And you think about the cost of a couple snow blowers is trivial. So it's a protection just in case that stuff comes. Correct. Absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and I love wells for that reason. The Reno Tech Park, there's over a dozen wells, right? And each one of them can support, 3 of them alone could support more than 10 times the actual water capacity that'll be needed for 600 megawatts of total water economized data centers. So there's far more capacity from each one than what's actually needed. And for exactly that reason, because, and it's all from well water anyways, but the bottom line is, I'll serve from that. Bottom line is there's redundancy wells, and in Quincy, Washington, we did the same thing. The well there couldn't support the full amount of load, but it could at least offset, some of the usage. So it delays or prolongs the amount of time before you run out of water if the city, water supply gets cut. Yeah, it's a great point. Yes, sir.
What happens to the Aurora skating, or is the stuff saying just part of it?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, undoubtedly, there's going to be a link between the two. Yeah, but I couldn't say what it is. I don't know. I haven't looked into that. Yeah, but I mean, you're thinking along the right lines. I mean, these are great things to think about. Like, how is that going to impact things, right? Going forward.